Hello and welcome to Herpetological Highlights. This is episode 232. My name is Tom Major and co-hosting with me, as always, is Ben Marshall.
Hey.
And we're back. We're talking about something quite unusual. Well, not unusual to us. We're emotional beings. But maybe a little bit unusual in the context of reptiles.
Actually, this is probably not unusual for pretty much anything that is alive and can be termed an animal. I would suspect
anything alive and an animal is going to probably have this degree of sentience Ben's suggesting. We're talking about animal cognition. We've actually got a paper here which has been published by some scientists in the journal Animal Cognition. It's by Hoehfurtner, Wilkinson, Moszuti and Burman. This year, 2025, evidence of mood states in reptiles. So we're talking about red-footed tortoises, Helenoides carbonaria, named after...
Carbonara, of course.
Carbonara, yes, because they really like smoked ham. And these tortoises, where does it come from? Latin. It's Latin, carbonarius, which means relating to coal. So...
Oh, okay. So I'm assuming that carbonara, as in the food, the pasta dish, is probably coming from a very different angle. Or actually comes from a different root, or is spelt differently, and my ignorant ears just hear it as the same.
Unless it's like the smoked meat portion of the dish gives it its name, coal on the meat.
It could be
pasta.
Yeah,
that seems pretty tenuous. I don't know.
But either way, red-footed tortoises. That's who we're talking about today, and whether they have moods.
But actually, now I'm thinking about it, red-footed tortoise, right? They're quite a big tortoise. They're from northern parts of South America. But that name, coal, I wonder if it's because their red legs look like coal burning, because it's like a black surface with a red underneath.
Like they've been walking across hot coals and they've singed their... interesting. Yeah, really cool. That's quite playful. That's quite fun.
Because there's that Pokemon, isn't there, called Torkoal, which is very similar. It's a second generation one.
Torkoal, fire tortoise, huh?
Fire tortoise. So maybe it's all related. Anyway, so... We're talking about the mood states of tortoises. Basically, throughout human history, everyone's just been whole time saying that tortoises don't have moods. That's just all they've been saying. They're like, tortoises haven't got moods. They're not birds. They're not mammals. They're just, they're basically boulders with four little appendages.
That level of brain activity, if you're being really harsh.
Essentially, fundamentally, what people have been saying is that tortoises don't have the capacity to have good days and bad days. And I, for one, think it's high time somebody said something else about this. And along come these authors with a clever strategy to try and determine exactly how the tortoises are feeling. Should we start by just sort of fleshing out the region in which we are discussing, like moods, emotions?
Well, I think that's worthwhile.
I think before we started recording, you said something very poetic as to the distinction between moods and emotions, and it really affected me. So if you could say it again.
Well, I'm going to caveat this with I haven't done any reasonable amount of reading on what counts as an emotion, what counts as a state. But the impression I get from the introduction of this paper is that emotions are your like immediate response. They're sort of short term. They're sort of spiky in terms of there, and then they sort of fade away. Whereas a mood, I think the phrasing I used is like an echo of that emotion. So it's sort of you experience something, but then the mood sort of continues on. It's got like this baggage with it, and therefore can sort of be defined as state in that sense that it lasts, that you are in a mood as opposed to in an emotion. An emotion is something you experience, and then a mood is something that comes from that. Potentially.
Totally relatable. We can all think of things that are, something happens, maybe it makes you angry. Let's say, for example, you're walking down...
And you step on some hot coals.
A sidewalk, if you will. Hot coals is a good example. But I was thinking more of like maybe a 21st century example. You're walking on a pavement and there's someone in front of you, but they've got their phone out and they're walking really slowly. The immediate feeling is rage. That's an emotion. You're angry. Your instinct is to do something immediately to try and rectify this idiot slow walker. But then that will subside. But then later on, when you get home and you realise it's a red-footed tortoise, and you're like, well, he's going as fast as he can. No, But then you get home and you think, oh man, that slow walker, that really wound me up earlier. And you're in a bad mood about it. So it's like later on, it's different. And I think that fundamental difference is
right. And it colours, the idea is that it's going to colour your reaction to other things that might not necessarily lead to, whatever response if you were in a different mood, right? It's
totally
that momentum.
Exactly. And the whole point of all this is like an affective state. If you are feeling a certain mood, it's likely to impact how you react to certain stimulus, for example, or like opportunities that are presented to you. If you're in a really good mood, you're likely to look at things optimistically and take a sort of optimistic bent on what's likely to be an outcome to any interaction.
So,
whereas if you're in a bad mood, it could be the opposite.
Added layer to this, which I'm going to bring up now, but the paper doesn't really go into, but I do think is important context just to have as you're listening to the sort of results and the methods and sort of how they went about things, is I think that there's an additional layer to this the paper doesn't fully address, and that's the sort of impact of personality as well. Because there's obviously sort of emotion and then there's mood, and to me, personality I could see as, mood writ even larger, right?
Yes.
Tendency that is tied to the individual that never, that is meant to be somewhat stable. That's the idea of distinct personalities, that they are meant to be identifiably stable. I mean, they can change over time, but they should be reasonably stable. And I do think that
largely they're stable.
Personality then plays a role in likelihood of a certain emotion being felt and a likelihood of a certain mood being induced. And I don't know, I haven't had a huge amount of thought when it comes to emotion and animal behavior. I'll admit that now, but it does feel to me like there is I was going to say hierarchy, but I don't think that's really fair. More like a sort of Venn diagram-like situation with all these three different aspects all interacting with each other. And I don't think the paper really hits on personality, and you'll see what I mean when we hit on the results, because there's some cool findings here. But without the personality aspect discussed, I'm not sure if they can be entirely attributed to mood. And maybe there's a bit of personality in play here as well.
No, I think that's fair. And I think you do have to be careful in terms of what you attribute these types of behaviors to.
Right.
And
what you want is to read the mind of the tortoise. That's the ideal, right?
But I've always said this, if you do accidentally read the mind of a tortoise, you will immediately be irreparably rendered insane.
Yeah, like some sort of vision of an eldritch being, just fundamentally unknowable to the human mind, is the tortoise mind.
Those thoughts are too great for God knows how that would feel. But anyway, so we've got this sort of idea that tortoises might potentially perform, let's say, differently if they are in a different mood. And the way that they do this, the way that they determine whether or not the tortoise is sort of feeling optimistic or not, is in what they call a spatial cognitive judgment bias task, which is like those 5 words together, difficult to sort of decode, but essentially
to pass.
Essentially what they do is they have a tortoise in an arena and they train them. So they'll have 2 locations where they'll put bowls, and at any given time, the tortoise will get a bowl put in the environment in which it's living, or as it's sort of an experimental arena. And they'll put the tortoise in the arena, then they'll put a bowl down. And if the bowl is in the positive location, as the tortoise approaches it, some rocket will come down out of nowhere and land on the bowl, and the tortoise will have a delicious...
Rocket as in the leafy vegetable, as opposed to a rocket. When you say rocket comes out of... it comes down and lands... It sounds like it's some sort of rocket-propelled food delivery system.
No.
Yeah, a lovely leaf of rocket, presumably that the tortoises quite enjoy.
They love rocket. They like it. They're big fans of peppery salad leaves. So they quickly learn that if they approach the bowl which is placed in that particular location, that is a positive reward. And they're all capable of learning this. They'll approach it quickly because they know that when they approach it, in that location, rocket arrives. There's also a negative one, which they use. And in that bowl, if the tortoise approaches it, nothing ever happens, right? It's a waste of time. So the tortoises come to know that location never has anything, and it's a waste of time to go there. Then they introduce a little bit of ambiguity to the situation. So the tortoise is then presented with a bowl which might be in the middle of the two locations, or maybe it's near the negative bowl, or maybe it's near the bowl which sometimes has rocket appear in it. And they wanted to see whether or not the tortoises could sort of reason, I guess you could say, to try and determine, okay, are the tortoises thinking that something is more likely to have food if it's closer to the one that they know to be positive than the one which is known to be negative?
Which is where you're getting this optimism, right? It's like, okay, well, the bowl is nearly positive, so there might be rocket there. I'll go have it. Might be worth the effort.
And the tortoises tended to demonstrate that, right? Like they sort of lumped together the positive, near positive, and medium bowl locations as sort of like broadly likelier to have food in. And then the sort of negative and the near negative one, they were like, nah.
Which, does that already hint at something quite cool? I don't think they sort of touch on it with the discussion, but does that suggest that tortoises are more, or red-footed tortoises are a glass half full kind of species, right?
I think so, because if you're considering medium to be likelier to have food, I think that is a glass half full kind of vibe.
Or, counterpoint, whether moving to a bowl is so little effort for them that there's not, when it comes to 50-50, it's totally fine to go for because there's not that cost. And so that optimism, the is it worth it thing shifts with the cost as well as the benefit. And the cost is reasonably minor. It's enough to see this near negative and negative delay. They're less keen to go see it. But I do wonder whether that optimism, obviously that optimism would shift when suddenly there's a risk or something like that. But I like the idea of thinking that they're somewhat naturally optimistic. There's something very endearing about.
I do like that a lot.
The tortoises as optimistic.
If you see a wild tortoise just busting it around, they do kind of look a little bit hopeful. There is a hopeful bent to that sort of lifestyle, I think. And then so we've got this situation where the tortoises are broadly speaking demonstrating a little bit of optimism, it seems like. And then they wanted to look at how the tortoises were performing in this sort of optimism test, if you will, by comparing their performance in some novel object tasks where the tortoises were exposed to some situations which they wouldn't be expecting because they had no prior experience of this kind of madness. And then they were sort of seeing how the tortoises responded to that. And they were giving them novel situations. I think one of the things they did was they put a placemat. What is it? Like a coaster? A coaster made of beads?
A bead coaster is the term used, I believe.
And so we're kind of imagining like, when you're a kid and you get all those beads and you put them next to each other, you put them together and then you iron them and it makes them go into one thing and they're plastic.
I'm also slightly picturing a coaster made out of, you get those car covers that are made out of car seat covers that are made out of those large beads. I could imagine a coaster made out of that, but also I think that would be awful for putting a drink on. I feel like it would slide around something fierce.
Mate, uncles in the 90s had those bead chairs, didn't they? That really went out of fashion.
Who knows why?
Maybe. And so that was one of the things. They put them in a situation with a bead coaster. The tortoise is like, what the? Anyway, so then the other one, what did they do? They put them in it wasn't that well described in the paper, but it seems like they put the tortoises in some kind of tortoise discotheque, and the tortoise was sort of subjected to...
that's when I'm left with ambiguity, exactly what the change to the texture and sort of novel environment was. I'm thinking that they're thrown into some sort of mirror-like discotheque hell.
In Get 'Em to the Greek, where they...
I've never...
Oh, you haven't seen it?
Nope.
Okay, so there's a scene in that where they take some kind of like hallucinogenic drug and there's a fairy wall which really captures their attention. That's how I'm imagining the tortoises experiencing this set of circumstances, just completely bewildered. And then what they wanted to do was look at their anxiety in novel situations. And how did they code the anxiety? How do they determine whether a tortoise was calm or anxious? Was it to do with
head extension? So how far their head is extending out of their carapace, with the assumption that if it is not extended very much, they are in an unrelaxed, cautious state, whereas increased head extension is relaxed, confident, go-getter.
Pretty convenient studying an animal that just gets like a sort of head extension when it's happy, isn't it?
Well, you do need some metric to go by, right? And I think that this makes a lot of sense for the tortoises. I'm not an expert on tortoise behavior, so maybe there are some alternative interpretations for this. But we see sort of the tongue flicks being used for snakes, and there's often some metric that you've got to choose to get an insight into their mind. And I do think that it's up to interpretation exactly what that means for the emotional state of the animal. I do think that's sort of the harder bit to really tease out, because you're describing a physical action. What you then read into that action, what you sort of interpret it as, I think is harder.
Yes. And the kind of crux of this was that the individuals which had a tendency in the bowl test to be more optimistic. So the more optimistic individuals who were sort of heading towards more bowls which weren't the positive bowl also had a pattern of being less anxious in response to novel situations. So when they were put in these strange environments with carpet and music that were unfamiliar to them, they were less fearful, and those ones were also more optimistic. So you've got this kind of dual thing where the tortoises are like, they're more hopeful in food-based tests and also less concerned in tests where there are novel situations. And so the authors of this paper are suggesting that means that there are sort of mood states as a result of that, and that these ones which are optimistic are also less anxious in response to novelty, which I see that there is this definite pattern. But as you were saying earlier, Ben, I think it is difficult to disentangle this from personality. You were suggesting before we recorded that maybe they should try and elicit a bad mood in the tortoise and then test them again, like do something which will upset them.
So what I was looking at, I looked at the paper they cited that used rats for it in a very similar sort of setup, but there seemed to be some sort of like treatment applied to the animal to induce a mood rather than sort of take, I don't know, maybe I'm misreading it, and I'm fully happy to, if someone was like, no, you've misunderstood how they did the initial test, that's fine. I'll take it on the chin. But my interpretation of the first sort of setup with that optimism is potentially doing a better job of describing tortoise personality than it is mood. And therefore it's then subsequent relating to, this novel environment sort of thing feels like it's, okay, well, you've got bold animals are more bold when they're presented with a novel environment or novel object. That to me is what I'm seeing in these results, is just boldness goes with boldness. Optimism could be boldness interpreted. It's not necessarily optimism. And I feel like I'm missing the bit that makes it mood. And I kind of feel like that needs to be a time-sensitive aspect, because I would expect mood to dissipate over time. So I feel like there needs to be that intervention.
And now that we're talking about this, I can see a couple of reasons why they might not have been able to get to that quite. Maybe it's like you say, we're just kind of getting slightly wrong end of the stick. But also I think it could be, do we actually know a reliable way to upset a tortoise?
Right.
How would you elicit a good mood or a bad mood in a tortoise?
You should be able to ID it through the head extension, potentially, right? Like that should be an external indicator of how they're feeling, which I suppose is, no, they do that. So they have that. They have that as an indicator of mood. And then they have the latency. So should there be...
What's the latency in this situation?
Right, so latency to reach novel object, right? And latency...
Right, the time taken, yeah.
And that's related to latency to reach near negative location in the initial thing. And that to me is indicating, okay, bold goes with bold. Like, okay, so even if you know it's negative, then you're probably going to go for the novel object sort of thing. See, this is... I'm just feeling that there should be an extra twist here that I'm missing, and it's probably there because you do have the mood. Is the neck extension demonstrating the mood then? Is that what we're getting at?
So yeah, what are they then? Are they tested?
And then they should be
tested really close together,
like an interaction with the sort of baseline optimism, and then the mood, and then the latency to novel object, all coming together. And really, what you care about is whether there's a relationship between the neck extension, i.e. mood, and the latency to go to a novel object, accounting for an underlying sort of boldness from the cognitive sort of bias test. And I don't know, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm feeling like I probably am missing something, because there are three aspects here. And as I was reading it, I was really focused on 2 and forgetting about the neck extension aspect to it. And that's where I'm probably getting lost here.
But there aren't any like visual comparisons.
Performance in the cognitive bias test and concurrent anxiety test with more optimistic individuals showing less anxious behavior in response to novelty and more pessimistic individuals showing behavioral indicators of increased anxiety. See, that's the thing. Right slap bang at the beginning of the discussion. That's the takeaway, right? That's what they're leading with.
Mm-hmm.
So you're connecting the cognitive bias test, which is determining their optimism or not, as the term used, which I think could equally be indicated as boldness, and linking that with less anxious behaviors. That to me, okay, that's boldness and boldness together there. Less anxious, more optimistic, could just be boldness to boldness. And that's probably where I'm getting.
I totally see where you're coming from.
That's probably what I'm latching onto. Because is there an indication that latency to go investigate that novel object is also an indicator of anxiety, just like the head extension? Are they measuring the same thing? And that's why I'm not really seeing the difference here. Because they don't find the relationship there, which is probably why it's not displayed visually in any figure. And that's why it's sort of focused on this novel object aspect, right? There's some really cool stuff in this paper. I'm positive of it. I'm just struggling to pull it out.
No, for sure. It's a really cool study about the fact that tortoises are generally optimistic and that there is like variation in their boldness.
Right. And that impacts a sort of subsequent test regarding novelty and potentially a more distressing environment, a more distressing setup. I think there's something really intriguing there because that's got so many sort of implications for risk-taking and, you know, those sorts of things. When an animal's stressed or something, maybe it's going to be taking less risks. When an animal's anxious, it's going to be taking less risks, maybe.
I think I fundamentally agree, though, that maybe the next step is to have a bunch of tortoises. I mean, they talk about enriching environments for reptiles, and like there is evidence that more enriching environments cause reptiles to behave differently. So I think if they had 2 sets of tortoises, one of which that was kept in like a barren cell, and the other one was like living in a forested wonderland, potentially with other social interactions and all that kind of stuff, and then you compared those tortoises, or maybe even over time, if you had them in the beginning in like a medium enclosure, and then subsequently some moved to a good, some moved to a bad, test them again, something along those lines, that might be more indicative of a mood.
Yeah, I think I would have a bunch of tortoises, have them set up, work out their personalities with regards to the thing of interest, be that boldness, optimism, whatever, split them, apply whatever intervention that's meant to induce mood-changing impact. Once you're confident that that mood has been induced because you've got some sort of way of measuring its impact, then you apply this final one to see whether it's altering. You know, you want the test, you know, some sort of test done before the mood was applied to, and then afterwards as well.
I've got the perfect analogy for humankind here. You've got a set of humans. You could say like, I guess you determine their likelihood to, I don't know, engage in play or something like that with an item.
It just needs to be a simple test, right? You know, it could be quickly counting the number of objects on a desk, or maybe remembering a certain series of numbers or something along those lines. It almost doesn't matter what the test is. It just has to be something that the individuals can be motivated to do and can be measured equally, and also has something that can, you know, there's going to be an innate ability as well. Well, maybe not innate, but an ability that you can ascribe to personality that you can then account for.
This is it. Okay, you get all the test subjects to drive to the test center, right? Previously, you've tested their skills at this memory challenge.
Right.
And then half of them, you tell them, mate, someone's just gone into the back of your car in the car park. Sorry. And they're just sitting there like, bollocks. And then you give it half an hour for emotion to become mood. They're in a bad mood.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other half, you maybe tell, oh my gosh, you've won £200.
You've won £200.
And they're like, oh, sick. And then you give that half an hour to settle in and become a good mood.
Right. But you still need something, you know, you're making the assumption that being told that with the car will put someone in a bad mood and winning a bit of money or put someone in a good mood. You still need something to validate that against, that they are in a good mood and that they are in a bad mood. And that, I think, is the bit that's tricky, right?
You could just ask them.
Right, doesn't work for tortoises.
No, it's a waste of time. Tortoises.
Right. They'll just stonewall you.
They always do.
So also, while we were talking, I did look up what the novel environment was because they cite something, is bubble wrap.
Oh, God, put them on bubble wrap. Must be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But they hate that.
But it didn't affect it too much, right? Like, it didn't impact the latency. The novel object did, but not the novel environment, right?
No. I think, long story short, cool paper about tortoises. And I mean, totally an area which is not, and this is like psychology type stuff, isn't it, really?
I mean, we've done a lot of talking around what the paper's getting at because I think we had a tough time getting to the crux of the finding. But I do 100% think there's something really, really cool here with regards to tortoise mood, if you want to call it that, and novel environment impacting that and that interacting. And the optimism thing is just fascinating. The hope. Tortoises can experience hope, maybe?
I do like that. I love that tortoises have hope.
So there's a lot good here. A lot good.
It's a cool paper that makes you think about the way tortoises are thinking, which still not many people are doing. And that's very, very cool. So let's move on. What have we got? We've got a species of the bye week this week, which we're moving from chelonians to lizards. And we have a paper here which is called Phylogeny and Systematics of Arabian Lacertids from the Messalina gutulata species complex with the description of a new species. So we're looking at a genus called Messalina, and we are in the Middle East, which is a region we seldom come to for new species descriptions. It does happen. But
right. That's what kind of drew me to it. It feels like we get a lot of stuff. You know, we always have a species of bye week that comes out some sort of limestone karst system. Be it southern China or some cloud forests somewhere else. So many species coming out of those sorts of environments that something coming right out of right in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula, right in the middle of Saudi Arabia, and quite widely distributed as well.
A species which is actually found in like multiple countries, not some tiny isolated new thing. But we are in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Kuwait.
Describing what the paper was title-wise, I did...
No, not at all, really.
Okay.
No, you're all good. Just to say we're in the Middle East, which is kind of cool. So this is a paper about a lizard in Saudi Arabia. So basically this species complex, Messalina gutulata, these lizards, they are lacertids. So they're kind of quite slender, quite fast lizards. Excuse me. Lacertids tend to sort of hang out on rock walls.
Saxicolous lifestyles.
They sort of tend to sort of scuttle around. Saxicolous. Not entirely. Some of them like sand, but they like... Certainly the ones that we're familiar with.
What is sand if not tiny rocks? Come on.
But sand, you can't say running on rocks is the same as running on sand.
Okay, so what's the equivalent if it's not Saxicolous? What is it? Sandicolous?
I don't actually know.
It's probably like Dusticolous, which would be what? Palino something.
I don't know, mate. But I don't know. Is there not a word for like desert? I think that's arid, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got like Zurich. Is it Zurich?
Xeric vegetation. Anyway, so let's talk about this lizard. So essentially rocky areas, gravelly areas in Saudi Arabia. They found this new lizard, thought it might be something different, and did some genotyping work. And sure enough, they've discovered a really, really widespread species of these little lizards in the genus Messalina. What do they look like? They're sort of thin, with a very pointy face. They've got sort of yellowy dots on the back, sort of reddy tan back. Then the tail's quite nice. It's sort of like almost a bluey, steely grey.
Yes, more blue in the juveniles, I think.
And they live in a very harsh-looking environment. It looks extremely dry in Saudi Arabia there. There's like sort of, it's almost like a sort of gravelly desert, but then there's these very abrupt vertical cliffs
Tors,
of this thing called these escarpment, these tors. And apparently that's where they live. They live sort of in these rocky, gravelly habitats. Sometimes it's barren, flat plains. Sometimes it's rocky outcrops. Sometimes on like slopes of gravel, like scree. But they tend to prefer the sort of flat, hard areas with shrubby vegetation. And they just sort of hiding in rock crevices. Imagine they're just running around eating insects. They tend not to like sand so much. Other species in the complex tend to be the sort of sand dwellers. And on the map that they've provided of the distribution of this new species, showing the localities in Jordan, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, you can quite clearly see that they're closely tied to areas where there is not just pure sand. Like they're not sand lovers. They've described it. They've called it Messalina cryptica. Cryptica derived from the Latin word for concealed or hidden, and refers to the fact that this species has been overlooked because it's so morphologically similar to the other species of the complex. They thought it was all one species.
I think that that's the whole sort of, wide distribution aspect as well, isn't it? Is certainly the impression I got from this paper is there seems to be some unresolved complexities in this group. And that's sort of how this species has come about being split off. Is it's not something you'd go out to the field, find one and be like, oh, this looks weird and different. It's sort of come about through an overall examination of this complex rather than coming across something bizarre in the field, it feels.
Yes. And actually, this paper was born out of a previous paper, which was by Sindako et al. I think they identified that there was going to be a new species that needed to be described. And these guys have sort of gone ahead and got it done.
So it's this sort of progression, isn't it? Which is really, really intriguing. Not massive lizards. I don't think we said how big they are. They're about 40, 46, 47 millimeters SVL. So they're quite sort of lean little rock dwelling guys. Really beautiful little lizards. Can be found all over the place, it seems, which is great. Probably means that they're not in immediate danger of disappearing, which is lovely. Because they've got quite a wide distribution. Probably they're suggested to be quite numerous where they are at different times of the year, which is also good. Love some species of my week that's not just immediately classed as doomed.
No, and it's kind of interesting because it seems like these species, their distributions are largely explained by like where they can travel across rocks to reach. If there's sand in the way.
That's what they're hinting. Yes, that's what comes up in the discussion, right? That the dunes and sort of sand-heavy areas may be acting as a barrier, but at the same time, I don't have a massive amount of knowledge about dune systems in Saudi Arabia, but the paper's sort of suggesting that a lot of these sort of dune systems are relatively, well, a couple that they discuss anyway, are reasonably new in terms of the grand, millions of years of shifting landscapes, and therefore some of this widespread species looking quite sort of similar to itself might be because it was capable of moving through areas maybe before these dune systems came into existence around 40,000 years ago, which 40,000 years ago sounded like a long time, but evolutionarily it's not necessarily a huge amount of time. So
no.
Yeah, I think there's still some questions over exactly where this group originated. They do sort of suggest that maybe Jordan is a possible sort of starting point, or at least where modern day Jordan is, because they seem to be sort of quite deeply set up in the tree. But there's also question marks over whether this species, or how far this species likely goes into Iraq and sort of other northern areas of Saudi Arabia that are less sampled. So who knows? It might not be sort of maybe Jordan's not sort of where they came from, and maybe they were popping up maybe somewhere further further east and further north.
But nice to have a lizard from the Middle East, a really cool thorough paper. Essentially more of this Messalina, which I must confess I've never heard of before. Messalina, there you go. Messalina cryptica.
Fantastic.
So have you got any other business this week, Ben?
I have one little bit of any other business, just a little bit of self-promotion. We have a preprint out looking at the sort of morphology of jungle crows taken from over 1,000 museum specimens and an ungodly number of photographs of those museum specimens. The quick summary of it is that previous subspecies splits of the eastern jungle crows don't seem very apparent in the sort of hard tissue measurements from these museum specimens that cover their entire distribution. The only real one that pops out as looking particularly distinct is crows on Japan. They seem to be that subspecies separation potentially might have some morphological sort of evidence for. The rest, it's pretty weak. Maybe the Philippines, but I think what's kind of more cool is forget about what people have talked about with previous sort of subspecies suggestions. There are some indications that maybe some of the bill morphology is contingent on climate and particular sort of as a way of mitigating or dealing with colder, more seasonal climates or more consistently hot climates further south in their sort of, they're called large-billed crows. That's their alternative name. And maybe that large bill is kind of critical for their adaptation to warmer and colder areas. You know, colder as in like Russia and northern Japan, warmer as in like the Philippines and Indonesia. So pretty dramatic contrast.
That's a big thing, isn't it, in birds, bill? Because it's like an elephant's ears, right?
It's also a very convenient thing because it preserves very well. So it certainly seems to be quite important. It's also very measurable, which is great.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So this is presumably off Aubrey's PhD work.
100%.
Big up, Aubrey. Well done. That's sick. Congratulations, guys. And hopefully that will be swiftly through review for you.
Hopefully. And if not, it's at least interesting initially.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. And jungle crows are a bird, if you're wondering what Ben's talking about.
A crow.
When I didn't know you were going to say this, or I would have lined up a little crow soundbite.
Oh, put it in post. Yeah, but you got to get a large-billed crow one. They're specific.
Well, now maybe I'll have it ready for the next time, and I'll just start mingling it in at random times.
There you go. When it gets through review.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, great stuff. We'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to read some of Aubrey's work and Ben's work about crows. And yeah. If you want to get in touch with us, you can, herphighlights@gmail.com. Instagram, we're on at herp_highlights or at Tom_E_major. And I think that's pretty much it. All that remains to be said is thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.